Today, we're going on a bit of an inward journey. We're going to use the work of the incredible psychologist Carl Jung to ask a question that's, well, kind of fundamental. How well do you really know yourself? Because according to Jung, for most of us, the answer is not very well at all.
Jung kicks us off with this really striking image. So what on earth does he mean by that? He's pointing to this fundamental split inside all of us. See, we've got the conscious side that we think we know, but then there's this other, hidden side that's pulling strings and often acts without our permission. And that division right there, that's the starting point for really understanding ourselves.
All right, so let's explore this hidden territory, this hidden half. In our first section, we're going to unpack Jung's revolutionary idea that a huge, unseen part of our own mind is shaping our lives every single day.
You know, before Jung, psychology was mostly focused on what we could consciously see and report. It's like trying to understand an iceberg by only looking at the tip. Jung's radical claim was that the real engine of our personality is the unconscious, this vast, hidden reservoir of our thoughts, our feelings, our memories. He basically said that without acknowledging it, psychology itself is totally incomplete.
And here's why this matters so much. Having an unexamined unconscious isn't just some abstract philosophical problem. It has very real consequences. When we're blind to our own hidden motives or our own flaws, we don't just make mistakes. We start projecting those flaws onto other people. We see the source of our problems in our partners, our friends, our jobs, pretty much everywhere except where it often starts, inside ourselves.
So where does this hidden self even come from? Well, Jung traces its roots all the way back to our very first environment. Let's jump to our next section and see how our childhood becomes the soil where our unconscious really takes root. Jung makes a really powerful claim here. The anxieties and issues we wrestle with as adults, they often aren't new problems at all. They're actually echoes from the past. The patterns were set a long time ago, shaped by the atmosphere of our earliest years. Now, this isn't about blaming our parents, but it is about recognizing the deep historical roots of our own psyche.
Jung had this incredible metaphor for how this works, a poisoned atmosphere. He said that when parents push down their own unresolved conflicts, the problems don't just vanish, they linger in the air. A child is super sensitive to this kind of unspoken tension and literally absorbs these unconfessed issues, which can then bubble up later as their own psychological problems.
And this quote right here reveals a pretty radical clinical insight. For Jung, a child's psychological distress wasn't always their own. It could just be a symptom of the entire family system. So his conclusion was pretty clear. To heal the child, sometimes you have to treat the parent and actually address the source of that poison. Okay, so we've looked at the past. Now let's bring it into the present. How do all these hidden dynamics that were formed in childhood play out in our most intimate adult relationships? This next section explores the unconscious battleground of our partnerships. It's a question so many of us have asked, right? We start a relationship with love and connection, but so often we end up in this state of complete and utter misunderstanding. Jung would suggest that the answer isn't usually in our partner, but in the unseen parts of ourselves that we bring to the table.
Jung saw two paths in any conflict. The first is what he calls the caveman method, and it's our default setting. We project blame. The evil is in you, and we create what he calls an incurable misunderstanding. But there's another path, the psychological one. And it starts with a really difficult but crucial shift in perspective, from asking what's wrong with you to asking, is something wrong with us? That one tiny change in a single word opens the door to self-knowledge, to compromise, and to a real connection.
So if the caveman method is the problem, then self-knowledge has to be the solution. But how do we even get there? How do we achieve it? In this section, we'll look at the tools Jung gives us to start mapping our own inner, uncharted territory.
For Jung, the unconscious is kind of like the fiery, molten core of the earth. You can't just go there and look around. So how do you study it? Through dreams. Dreams are like the volcanic lava. They are eruptions from our hidden depths that bring this raw, rich material right to the surface. And by analyzing that lava, we can start to figure out what our own inner world is made of.
See, unlike our waking thoughts, which we are constantly filtering and censoring and editing, dreams are raw data. They are direct, unfalsified messages from our hidden self. They show us what our unconscious really thinks and feels. And that provides a vital counterbalance to the often limited and sometimes wrong perspective of our conscious ego.
But what's the point of all this investigation? Well, it's not self-absorbed, sterile brooding, as Jung calls it. It's serious work. and it's for anyone who genuinely wants to grow. Jung argued that making outward changes, like getting a new job or moving to a new city, is pretty much worthless without inner change. The ability to take on real responsibility in the world has to be built on a solid foundation of self-knowledge.
And this brings us to the final stage of the journey. We've talked about the problem of the unconscious, and we've explored the tools to understand it. Now, let's look at the ultimate destination, becoming a whole person.
And here's where we see that this inward journey has a profound outward effect. The more you understand the complexities, the contradictions, and even the darkness within yourself, the more you can understand and accept those same things in other people. Self-knowledge is really the bedrock of empathy. It makes you less judgmental, more tolerant, and ultimately more deeply connected to humanity.
So the ultimate goal of this whole process is to find a new center for your personality. Most of us live in our ego, the center of our conscious awareness. But Jung says there's a greater center, which he calls the self. The self is the organizing principle for the entire psyche. It's that midpoint where the conscious and the unconscious finally meet and become united.
This right here describes the destination of the journey. It's a fundamental shift in your psychological center of gravity. You move from being ruled by the small, limited, often fearful ego to being guided by the larger, wiser, and more complete self. This is exactly what Jung means by becoming whole.
And so we end by coming full circle. We all want to make promises, right? We all want to take responsibility for our lives. But Jung forces us to ask a really tough question first. Have you actually met the person who is making that promise? Because it's only by knowing that hidden other half of ourselves that we can truly, honestly stand by the commitments we make.